If you've lived in San Diego for a while, you might recognize the voice of our guest today. In 1984, Monica Zeck became the first female air traffic reporter and first television traffic reporter in San Diego. But off camera, she enjoyed a passion for safety issues. She has received numerous awards for her news coverage as well as her community activism. I'm Jenny Robinson, and this is PACE TV. Today we'll hear about Monica's mission to educate drivers and pedestrians on safety. Welcome to PACE, Monica.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
It's lovely to have you, and we're privileged that you're willing to spend some time with us.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into all this, the helicopter, the traffic control, and television in general.
Well, basically, it started back in high school. I was one of the first female interns, and I took an internship at Channel 10, KGTV. And that was my interest in broadcasting. And then I got into Grossmont College, took communications there, and then I was offered a job in radio. And I did some radio jobs for a while and bouncing around. And then I got a call one day at home, and it was from a gentleman who worked for the Automobile Club of Southern California. And he said, "Are you familiar with the traffic program?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, the person we had to let go, but we'd like to interview you for the position. Are you afraid of flying?" I said, "No, I don't have a problem with it." He says, "Okay, let's talk." And we did, and pretty much I said, if it doesn't work out, we can go our separate ways. But I found that it clicked. You know, I could fly and look down at something, and I could speak looking at something without having to use scripts.
But that must have been a transition for you to
It
be
was.
in a helicopter, first of all. The first time must have been quite a thrill.
It is, and in fact, San Diego looks very different from the sky. And so I was taking pictures too. And eventually I started getting requests to speak to groups about the job itself, and I'd show the pictures I'd been taking, but then I was doing my own research. My research rode with every law enforcement agency in the county. I also spent time with fire crews, paramedics, to hear what they saw on the roadways. Caltrans, had some great people with Caltrans I used to work with. And just with all that combined education, it literally changed the way I drove. And then I found, as I spoke to groups and passed that information on to them, what I was learning, I changed the way they drove and just the feedback, and I realized, wow, I've got an opportunity to educate others about being safe on our roadways. And from all the collisions I was seeing as a reporter, it increased my passion to do the safety talks.
Well, I'm sure that although all those ride-alongs, et cetera, were also helped you to be a better traffic reporter.
Exactly.
Because you knew what was happening down on the ground as well.
I could see exactly what was going on. And when I spoke to groups, I got feedback from them. What did they like about the reports? What did they want to hear more of? So I could cater my reports to exactly what the listener wanted. And one of their pet peeves was hearing a traffic reporter joke around with, let's say, the radio disc jockey and not get to the traffic reports, and they're depending on that report. They need to know whether to take 8 or 94 and that
That's
kind
right.
of thing. So I knew to just say, oh, yeah, that was funny. Okay, well, let's get to the information. And I right away get to the information. And by catering to what people wanted, I think that's what grew my popularity.
So you worked for, how many stations did you work for? Different ones?
At the highest point, I was 2 television stations. It started with Channel 39, NBC, and then at the same time started doing reports with ABC, Channel 10. And then I was doing about 10 radio stations.
So they would switch you over while you were in the helicopter, and you'd just go from one to the next to the next to the next, and you'd have to change it as the traffic changed during the day.
Exactly. Every report was different because traffic changes, and some of the things were the same, and I knew to get the biggest problems first, and not talk about the small stuff, get to the big stuff right away. And that I hear is an issue out there where people are, we don't want to hear the small stuff. We want to know where the big problems are and if it affects us.
Yeah.
And it just was catering to what people wanted, getting them timely information. We had ways working with Caltrans, the ramp metering system. It's where you go onto the freeway at these ramp meters.
Yeah.
Well, they have monitors in the freeways. And with that monitor, it feel the speed of traffic, so you could look at a screen. And first Caltrans had it, and they let us use it too. And you could see how slow or fast people were going. So even on cloudy days, rainy days, foggy days, where we couldn't fly, we still had traffic information. And it was nice, Caltrans, so they nicknamed it the Monica system. And I said, how's that? And he said, well, monitor, M-O-N-I, would be monitoring the freeways, CA, congested areas.
Oh, that's great.
So I thought, well, that was nice of you. Thank you.
That's great.
So that was fun.
So, but that's not all that affected you to switch over to teaching safety. You had a job actually working for El Cajon as a safety.
Well, that came later. So,
okay.
Right, I did traffic reporting for 18 years, and I was really getting into safety, and I just felt like I want to do safety full time. And I was doing it on the side, just freelance, and so I thought, well, gosh, I wish I had a job that could include safety. And within a week, I ran into a woman who worked for El Cajon, the El Cajon Fire Department, and I said, I wish I had a job just like yours, as we were talking. And she goes, are you serious? And I said, yes, why? And she said, well, I'm planning to retire. In fact, my husband wanted me to retire about 5 years ago, and you'd be perfect. I didn't think anybody could take my place, but you'd be perfect, because she would see me at all the same safety meetings and heard me talk. And so the rest is history there. I met the fire chief, and he said, Monica, put us on the map. Nobody knows we're here. So I started in August of 2001. Then September 2001 came, and it was hardly a month later, and 9/11 hit. We had the only search and rescue K-9 team in the county, and it just so happened there was a conference of K-9 teams, and they were somewhere back east. Well, one of ours, we had two sets, one stayed behind. Well, it just so happened 9/11 hit. The LA County team, who was first to go, and the USAR team, Urban Search and Rescue, they were called to go, and to complete the team, you needed that search and rescue K-9 handler. Well, theirs wasn't there. They were at the conference. So they found out our guy was still behind. So they called the fire chief, Rich Henry, at the El Cajon Fire Department, said, can we take your person with us? And he said, sure, you have my blessing. And so then at the time he was engineer Steve Swaney, who happens to be now the fire chief at Heartland Fire and Rescue, which changed names from El Cajon Fire. And he went, and he was there within 24 hours of the collapse. And so I told the media, we've got one of our guys there, the first representative from San Diego County, and they're doing search and rescue. Then all the other K-9s came back to their cities, and then when our guy came back, the other part of the team, we did demonstrations for the media. This is what they're going to be doing. We had a special place of training to show them, and we put, basically I put them on the map. We had local and national coverage, and it was amazing.
Great.
On something so tragic, but it put the city on the map, and at least the fire department in El Cajon, and of course the fire chief was happy about that.
I'm sure he was.
And I was proud to represent them.
Yeah. So then you retired.
Right. So I did that job for 18 years. I was a public information officer for the city, and I did that for 18 years. And I thought, again, my passion for safety was there. And again, I was just freelancing, using my vacation hours to speak to groups. And I said, it's time to go. It's time to retire. I want to do this full time, the speaking. And so I did in August of 2019 here. And I've been getting requests to speak more often. I don't have to use vacation hours, and I have retirement is fine, so it just pretty much supplements if it is a paying voice talk. I'll do talks to local groups that are companies, and generally they have a safety budget. But for most, the military, I don't charge. They protect our country, and so I speak to them a lot. I work on behalf of MAD. I'm a speaker for MAD because of the loss of my father to a DUI driver, and but I involved with a lot of different issues.
Yeah. Now, and you have other personal reasons that you have family that have been involved, and yourself involved in accidents.
Exactly.
More than your average person.
True. Unfortunately, I'm a crash test dummy.
Yeah.
And my family is too, unfortunately. But it started, I had been lecturing for about 8 years. I'd started traffic reporting in '84, and then in 1992, my father was killed by a drunk driver. So one of the subjects I talked about regularly hit home. So now I had a personal side to it. I could talk about it from a first responder point of view, because I would go with our crews and I'd see what we saw, but then it hit home with the DUI issue. But how I feel about it is that I lost my father, and I still mourn his loss to this day, and it's been 27 years. But I speak on behalf of all the people that have been injured and killed, because especially those who have been killed, they can't speak for themselves, so I speak for them on being safer on our roadways.
Very good. And you've been involved in some serious accidents.
Very true.
We're glad that you are healthy and in one piece at this time.
Me too.
So one of the topics that you speak about is called Stay Alert, Stay Alive.
Exactly. In fact, that's what my talk is called.
Okay.
Stay Alert, Stay Alive, and that came about because of distracted driving. Distracted driving is our #1 problem on our roadways right now. And it continues to be with the invention of the cell phone.
Yeah. But
anything can distract you. We had a gentleman reaching for his hot chocolate, and by the time he looked up, as he was driving, he hit a car that had pulled over to the shoulder, and it was partially into the roadway, and everybody who was paying attention was swerving around them. But by the time he looked up, it was too late and hit that car, and it killed the driver that was in that car. So it doesn't take much to distract you to cause injury and death. And you see a lot of commercials. The Auto Club and other insurance companies have a lot of really good commercials out there, public service announcements that show distracted driving, people on their cell phones, and then rear-ending people, and that's the big one. And unfortunately, I lost my father. My daughter was hit by a DUI driver in '05, and then my collision that really had the impact on me was a stop sign runner, and I smacked into her, and it required surgery. And the surgeons I worked with both said I went to 2, and they both said I should have been paralyzed. And so I count my blessings and say thank you, Lord. But it gave me that information again to relay to the groups that I speak to on a perspective of personal perspective, emergency response, but again talking about the victim's loss.
Right.
And we call them collisions. We don't like the word accident because nothing happens by accident. And so, but a collision is, occurs when a lot of people are doing something they shouldn't be doing. And it's been estimated pretty much 99.9% of the people that cause collisions were doing something that they shouldn't have been doing.
Right.
So.
Now, for my brother, it was a bee in the cab of his truck.
Wow.
And for everyone, it's something different. Reaching for your cosmetics or whatever, but the cell phone has to be the biggest.
It is number one.
And how do you get people to realize that until they get in an accident?
Well, I describe about how distracted you are, and one of the things I mentioned is if you're driving down the roadway, would you do this for about 5 seconds and then look again, and then do this, and then look again? And of course not. I said, well, that's what you're doing. You look down, you're taking your eyes off the roadway. And in less than 2 seconds, that reaction time would have been the difference between life and death, that you looked up and said, oh my gosh, traffic stopped, and you hit the brakes. But if you're not looking down, and by the time you look up, you're probably already in the collision. And you may have a time to go, ah, and that's about it. And then I show some really strong videos. And one is
that'll always do it.
Exactly. One is a semi going down the roadway on a freeway, and he was in the right lane, and apparently from the police report, he was looking at his cell phone trying to find a better ringtone. So he's driving a huge semi, and he's in the right-hand lanes, and he doesn't notice traffic stopped in front of him. And see, that's just it. That's what happens in traffic. They don't notice traffic stopped, or a pedestrian stepping off the roadway. But this case, cars stopped, and you see this semi caught on a driver's cam, but he had a rear cam for some reason, this person, whoever had it, and he rear ends the backup and takes out at least 4 or 5 cars. And within that pileup, he killed a woman and her 3 kids. Survived. So just showing those pictures and say, this is what could happen if you keep up this bad habit. So I kind of point out the habits that create the collisions the first responders go to, and that is enough to educate. By the time I'm done, usually people are afraid to leave the room, because now they're more aware. And that's what I want to create, that awareness of what we do behind the wheel could affect the outcome on our roadways. And when we think of ourselves, texting and drinking and driving, things like that, we're only thinking of ourselves, and they call it a narcissistic behavior. Where you're only thinking of yourself. Who cares what everybody else is doing out there, and who you impact? And that's the problem, is we were impacting others, innocent people who had no business, they weren't a part of your business, but you made them a part of yours by not paying attention to what you're doing on the roadway.
Right. Now, and what part does a pedestrian play? Are they always on the defensive, or is there any kind of words of wisdom that you can give regarding pedestrians?
Well, definitely follow the rules of the road, whether you're in a car or you're walking. And crossing at corners is very important, because that's where people expect you to cross. And many of the people that are hit, injured, and more often killed, because you're fully open to the elements, is that they were jaywalking or mid-block crossing, where you're crossing in the middle of a block where somebody isn't expecting you to be, and boom, you're hit. Especially if they're distracted looking away and suddenly you step out in front of them, you're assuming that they see you. And no, they're distracted. Maybe they're just looking down to change the stereo. And you step out in front of them, they're not going to stop. Right. And same thing with kids running out and chasing a dog, chasing a ball. They're running out, expect the unexpected. So this is why I tell people, you need to be 100% alert behind the wheel. You can't let things distract you.
Right.
And if there's things you're doing, putting on makeup, I've got pictures of people brushing their teeth and things like that. Just reading a newspaper. I passed a gentleman on the freeway reading a fully open newspaper. If you're not alert to the things around you, that's when things happen. And you could have avoided that collision had you been 100% alert. So that's
right.
what I point out to people is, it doesn't take much to cause a collision, but think about the people you're impacting and their families.
That's right.
It's not just you.
That's right. When you get a new car, you're extra careful because you don't want a dent, and so you're really, careful when you're driving. And then when you have an old thing, sometimes you don't care so much, and you start to get distracted. What about bikes? We have a lot more bikes in San Diego at this time, more than ever, and we have bike lanes which are wonderful, but still, some of those bicyclists don't follow the rules.
It's rare that I see a bicyclist do the hand signals. It's very rare.
Or stop at a stop sign.
Or stop, right. They're part of the roadway. They have to follow the rules of the road. And when they let their guard down and they're rolling through stop signs or red lights and things, and we've had some bicyclists hit lately, just recently, that they ran a red light, and that's one of our biggest problems at intersections, or red light runners. But bicyclists do it, pedestrians do it, and they usually end up being injured or killed. And in fact, a large number of those collisions, 70% of our crashes happen at intersections, and part of the fatality rate on that include bicyclists and pedestrians. So again, if you stay at a corner and don't just cross because you got the green, look to make sure no one's making a right-hand turn on you or coming, running the red light into you. So you have to look first before you cross and make sure it's safe to cross, and hurry as fast as you can. You may have some impairments or older, but just don't dilly-dally. As I say, just get across that roadway as soon as you can to the other side, but make sure it's safe to cross. Don't assume you've got everything going for you if it says green, because other people may not be paying attention.
Absolutely. So what are the dynamics of a crash?
Well, people don't realize another factor is the vehicles we drive are not made for crashing. They're made for transportation only. The only vehicles made to crash are NASCARs, reinforced steel cages, but then they die too, and tanks. And I point out a tank because we did have one tank on our roadways. For those who've been in San Diego for a while, you just have to Google Tank Rampage San Diego and you'll see what I'm talking about. Right. But our cars aren't built for crashing, and to give them a good gauge, the faster you go, you increase your chances of dying. And how that happens is that the Highway Patrol uses a factor of that. For every 10 miles per hour in your speedometer, that's equivalent to a one-story fall. So if you crash at 10 miles per hour, it's as if somebody dropped you from a one-story building. Now imagine yourself going up an elevator as you go faster. So at 30 miles an hour and you crash, that's being dropped from a three-story building, and so on and so forth. At the 50-mile-an-hour mark, five-story equivalent, that's when we start seeing more fatals in our collisions. And for every 10 miles over 50, so at 60, you've doubled your chance of dying in a crash. And that's not even freeway speed yet at 65. And do you see people doing 65 most of the time? No. You see them doing 70, 80, 90, and they're endangering themselves and those riding with them and those around them. And that's what I point out. So when I show the crash, and I have a picture that I show of two crashes at 80 miles an hour, so eight-story crushing factors, and they're demolished. Yeah, so again, when we're racing around those roadways, especially with our families, we're the danger. We're more of a danger than worried about your kid being snatched. It's the parent. And the other factor that just came out too that I found super interesting, we're always behind a couple of years on statistics. Well, in 2017, there were around 10,000 people killed at the hands of a DUI driver, somebody driving under the influence. A little over 200 involved children killed in those crashes. A little over 100 involved the child that was with the drunk driver. And that meant usually a parent, maybe a grandparent, but they were in that vehicle. So then that's where I point out to parents that quite often they're the danger, whether they're speeding or driving under the influence. You're impacting your family. And little kids know. I did a talk on Red Ribbon Week. Don't do drugs, and alcohol is a drug. And I talked about the loss of my father. And I had a little girl that came up to me at the end of my talk when I talked to the kindergarten first graders, because they split them up. And I felt this little tug, and I looked down, and here's this little girl with tears in her eyes. And I said, "Oh my gosh, what's wrong?" She says, "I'm scared." And I said, "What are you scared about?" And I said something I said, and she said, "Well, I'm scared. My daddy drinks and drive, and I'm scared. I don't want him to die." And she just started crying. And I tried to tell that at a talk I did once, and I broke down crying. I couldn't. But it impacted what I felt from her, how scared she was. And some parents don't think their kids are that smart. They think, "Oh well, they aren't paying attention." And I have a very good picture that is a child in one of those little tight cars, a little red and yellow car, and he's got a little cell phone to his ear. So it's learned behavior. So what I point out to people is how you drive will be how your children drive. So as your children are riding with you, they're growing up, if you're yelling obscenities at other drivers because of road rage, or you're speeding, you're coming home with your spouse or significant other and you're under the influence and you both were out giggling and laughing, and the child's saying, "Wow, I guess they were both drinking." And then you tell that child, "Don't you drink and drive." And they're thinking, "Well, yeah, right, but you didn't do it. You were drinking and driving, came home."
That's right.
And so again, kids are smart. They see, and they're sponges, and they absorb, and it's learned behavior. How they drive is from the parent.
Absolutely.
Usually.
So are cars any safer?
Yes, there are some really good cars, and I really advise to go on to the Insurance Highway Institute website or NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and they both have crash tests of cars and who had better ratings than others. Anyway, but you can look up, and if you're looking at a certain car, look at how it held up in crashes.
Oh, that's very helpful.
And use that gauge when you go out to do car shopping.
Yeah.
And or as you're looking at cars, bring it up on your cell phone and say, oh, how does this car look in crash tests, and it'll bring it up.
Great.
But go to those two websites. They're probably one of the best too
Good.
that give you the actual test ratings.
Excellent.
And so that's how you should gauge because they'll have special features. Now, if you have too many features, sometimes they're distracting while driving. But again, the stronger built cars, that maybe where the airbags are placed, and maybe some other conveniences that make it a better car than others.
Right. Yeah, I think there are too many buttons that you can push and change and so forth. So how are senior drivers compared to your average driver?
Well, actually, senior drivers are fairly safe, depending on if their eyesight is good and they have a good depth perception, but those are the two things we start to lose as we get older.
And flexible, that you can turn around.
Exactly. Or they're driving too close to the steering wheel, because I describe airbags deploying at 180 to 200 miles an hour, and if you're sitting too close, you should be at least 10 to 12 inches away from the steering wheel. If that airbag hits you in the chest, it could bruise your heart, and we've had people that did pass away, and quite often it's an elderly person driving like this. But again, you have to look at yourself. My mom gave up her driver's license at, I think, 80, and it was because I was talking to her about a crash that occurred where a woman hit the gas instead of the brakes, and that's a typical thing.
It is.
And so she thought, I think I'm going to give up driving, because I'd be devastated if I killed somebody, because that woman did kill somebody, the incident I'd been to and told her about. But the other thing is, as a child of an older parent or grandparent who's still driving, look at their car, stop by and visit them and look at their car. And if you see scratches and dents, and you say, hey, what happened here? And they're saying, I don't know.
Oh, it wasn't me.
Right, I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
Then you may say, well, I think it's probably time to give up the license, but make sure you're prepared to give them alternatives, that maybe they've got the number of a special cab service, or like in my case, I got every other Friday off. So I said, hey, Mom, that's fine. I said, you can give up your license, and I can pick up groceries when I get off work, and on that every other Friday, we can make all your appointments for the dentist and the doctor and such on those Fridays. And so I gave them that alternative. And luckily she had friends too, that she'd go to the movies and such. But again, you have to give them the alternative. Don't just say, I'm taking your license away. And they're going to be, oh, hey, wait a minute, how am I going to get to church, grocery store, and get my medicines? Right. But again, tell them you'll do the errands for them.
Well, what are your comments on self-driving cars?
It's an interesting concept, and I think once everybody has one, maybe it'll work. But we've already seen where the test didn't work, where you really need to have a hands-on. And they've shown people driving down the roadway literally asleep because the car is driving for them. And it's a machine, and that's, things will go wrong. And I think you need to be alert, and it may drive for you almost like cruise control, but you really need that element when something happens. Is the car going to react? And I don't know if they've been perfected that.
So you're not going to go out and buy one tomorrow.
No, it's being, and that's the other thing, is make sure you get a good night's sleep for long trips, and that you don't drive. And we have a lot of people that are falling asleep behind the wheel.
Oh, absolutely.
And drowsy drivers are just as dangerous as drunk drivers, because they have, as they're driving along tired, and they see something and somebody changing a tire. Wow, somebody's changing a tire, and they don't realize they're driving toward whatever they're looking at. So people changing tires get hit a lot by people who are tired or under the influence, because it's a distraction, and it's like a moth to a light bulb.
Oh,
What's
boy.
that? And they drive right toward that
Oh,
object.
my gosh.
So very dangerous, change a tire on the freeway. And I broke down once. It's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now insurance is an important thing that you talk about, and I know it sounds boring, but it's really important. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, insurance, it's always good to have, whether it's fire insurance, home insurance, that kind of thing. But for your car, you need to have good insurance. And what I mean by that is, don't scrimp out. We all want to save a penny, but when it comes to the injury factor in collisions, especially if the other driver doesn't have insurance, period, or has a very low policy, they're only required to have $15,000 worth of coverage, and that barely covers a hospital visit. So make sure you have uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage, and make sure that policy is a big one. $250, if you can get up to $1 million, which sometimes just $30 more, it's worth it, because if you're seriously injured to the point even you're paralyzed, your bills could easily creep up to that $1 million range.
Or if you're sued.
Yeah, or they sue you. And there's an umbrella policy too. Check with the insurance. Not all insurance companies offer that, so make sure you check with the company that they have uninsured, underinsured, and if they have an umbrella that covers up to a certain point, so they don't take your home away and everything. So again, check with your insurance policy. You haven't looked at lately, and check for that addition, because there are a lot of people driving without insurance out there, and again, low insurance.
Yeah. Okay, and so to finish up, do you have any stories that you want to share with us that have happened back in the day or
traffic reporting
recently?
days?
Yeah.
There have been days where I was flying and it seemed like appliance day. Oh, we've got a refrigerator in this roadway and a washing machine in here, and it was just kind of strange how it ran in circles like that. But I think the 163 has been the most interesting through Balboa Park. And when there was something interesting, I would call it the scenic route. And we had one instance where I said, well, our scenic route this morning is the 163 through Balboa Park. We've got reports of a streaker.
Oh,
and
boy.
that's when streakers were big. And so this person evidently was running down the freeway somewhere on the shoulder or center divide. And
Oh, my. What time of day?
it was during a morning report.
Midday.
Yeah, midday
Oh,
morning
my
report.
gosh.
And I said, be careful, it's a scenic route, but it could be, it could be distracting. And in that same area, some years later, we had reports of a rhinoceros on the freeway.
gosh.
And Balboa Park, that's where the zoo is. So
Oh,
it's like,
my
wow,
gosh.
maybe it got out of the zoo and wound up on the freeway. And people reported it center divide, and they had a lot of calls. What it turned out to be was a life-size paper mache rhinoceros
gee.
that somebody, maybe during the night or something, ran out there and put it down on in
Oh,
the center
my
divide
gosh.
area. And it was heavy enough, but not so heavy as traffic drove by. The wind it kicked up caused it to kind of sway. So it looked real to a lot of
Oh,
people
my
driving by.
gosh.
So that was
Oh, that's funny.
a funny one. So
Well,
that's-
Monica, I wish that you could keep on talking,
Oh,
because
I've
we
got
have
a lot of stories.
I'm sure you do. But our time is up. So we're going to have to let you go. But I want to thank you so much for giving us this valuable information, and I hope our viewers will take it to heart.
Right, and one of the things I highly recommend, my website, monicazek.com, and
Great.
I like to put the latest information on there when it comes to traffic safety and other issues too. So if people don't have time for the news, they can go to my website and find
To
out
find
the
out the
latest
news of the day.
news, but more so the things that involve health, but especially
Okay.
driving safety.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.